We were also very fortunate as we were able to speak to Victoria Bellandini, the Senior Lecturer and Programme Leader of Fashion at the University of Lincoln, to find out more on the subject. What was fashion like in the 90s?
I think probably the main thing with the 90s was things were moving in a really different direction. It's a really funny period because you almost think, was the 90s anything particular? But obviously we think about things like grunge, where there was a real mix-up and everything that we understand as being beautiful and fashion as we know it, there was starting to be a real mash-up with things and it was getting really eclectic.
What were your experiences of the fashion industry in the 90s?
Well, I finished studying, and obviously as a student, you know, you were again wearing various looks that weren't necessarily high fashion. But during the 90s, I spent quite a bit of time working in TV costume things. So I was down in London. So I would say again, you could very much feel that whole Nirvana thing going on, and grunge was massive then. So I mean, obviously you'd got Kate Moss as well as one of the real original supermodels, and probably the first model to be known as well for being really unique. And I think it was the era where I kind of observed in the press and things the fact that models were becoming celebrities. But I think just that anything went, that there was a particular look, but your interpretation of wearing a granny dress with DMs or whatever you wanted, a check shirt, baggy stuff, you could just mix it up as you saw fit. So I think it was a decade where you could really use your own personality.
During your time in Italy while working at Ferrari during the 90s, what would you observe Italian fashion to be like during this time?
Ooh, I think Italian fashion's an interesting one because the Italians have got a very particular style. And they're very much, they do tap into the latest design trends, but I would say that really Italians are very classic, and even kind of Italian youth, there's still a certain look that's very unique to Italy. So, I mean, the grunge thing you saw, if you went to places like Milan, you'd observe it, but you could always decipher who were the kind of English or American tourists and who were the Italians. Italians still very much stuck to a particular look that was unique to them.
What changes have you seen in fashion over the last 20 years?
Oh, wow. Gosh, lots. And I think probably one of the main things now is I almost feel that we've got to the stage where there are so many trends every season that to a certain extent it's becoming irrelevant. There used to be just one or two trends adding key looks, but now anything goes. You've got trans-seasonal where things aren't as trend-specific. People are dressing more for function, but I think what I've noticed particularly in younger people, so looking at students and things, that in my eyes, a really dramatic, bold, kind of way out sense of dress is really disappearing, and it's becoming a lot more mainstream. High streets dominating a lot, which I think is a shame, but I think because of kind of financial pressures and things, maybe unique individuality is going to come back, hopefully.
Would you say you've seen trends from the 90s re-emerging nowadays?
Yeah, I think sportswear has never gone away. That sportswear as main wear, you know, even very simple things like wearing Converse. I mean, that's been around. Wearing trainers now is the norm. It didn't used to be. That was a 90s thing that came in. A lot of emphasis on denim season after season. That was a 90s thing. I think hairstyles have gone round and round. You'd got the whole Oasis, Blur, and Nirvana grungy thing happening, which we're still seeing now. I always say now fashion's going round in ever decreasing circles, so you're seeing it faster and faster. But maybe that's my age. You might want to cut that bit.
Thank you. We were lucky to be able to speak to Adam Mann from Yak Clothing Store, located in Lincoln High Street, which sells retro and vintage clothing items. How long has your shop been here?
21 years.
What was the success of the shop been like throughout the decades?
Obviously I haven't been here 21 years, I'm only 19. But they used to do like new clothing here, and then they saw the gap in the market for a retro clothing shop. Dave and Paul was his brother, they started with Ego, and they did second-hand clothing there, like retro. Well, it wasn't retro at the time because it was in the 90s. and then they opened Yak up because they saw a gap in the market. And then they just saw it and then eased towards 90s and gone with the trends really.
Do you remember what fashion was like in the 90s?
Yeah, it's just like quite colourful, a lot of like big lettered sweatshirts, like big Adidas signs, Nikes. Tracksuits were quite colourful, nice. A lot of like high-waisted jeans and stuff.
What are the most memorable things of 90s fashion in your point of view?
Again, just like the big logoed sweatshirts really, and the sportswear altogether. A lot of tracksuits around and stuff, like the shell suits. Well, they're more 80s, but easing towards. Okay, thank you.
Would you say that 90s fashion is still or making a comeback?
I think it's made a comeback. It's massive. The vintage market's just growing. Don't know how long it'll be around for, but I'm sure it will have its heyday and go.
Do you think the idea of retro clothing is timeless?
No, I think it's cool because in the 90s clothes were made really well. Quite thick wool and stuff like that. Good materials. So I think it's good, really, to try and bring the quality back to clothing.